The cabin lights were dim, the hum of the engine steady, and for a moment the flight felt ordinary. But then, in a snap, that calm shattered. A flight attendant loomed over a black teen, her scissors glinting under the overhead light. Without a word of consent, she reached down and sliced through a strand of his dreadlocks. The sound was small, but the humiliation was deafening. Passengers froze. Some gasped, others turned away, pretending not to notice. The boy's hands trembled as he touched the jagged ends, his face flushing with disbelief. Those dreadlocks were not just hair, they were his identity, his pride, the very expression of his culture. And in an instant, a stranger had cut into it as if it meant nothing. The attendant smirked, brushing off the act as though it were just procedure, her tone dripping with superiority. Around them, silence thickened. The boy's dignity had been attacked in front of dozens of witnesses, and not one voice spoke up. He swallowed hard, his eyes burning, fighting back tears he refused to let fall. But somewhere beyond that cabin, someone else was watching, someone who would not let this moment pass unanswered. Cliffhanger. But who was really watching from the shadows? The air in the cabin grew heavier, as if every breath carried the weight of what had just happened. A few passengers whispered, their uneasy glances darting toward the boy, but no one dared to challenge the uniformed authority standing over him. The flight attendant adjusted her jacket with a smug precision, as if cutting a child's hair was no more disruptive than handing out pretzels. The boy sat frozen, dread settling deeper than the lock that had been severed. Around him, the space that should have felt safe now pulsed with tension. An older woman across the aisle shook her head, muttering under her breath. A young man tapped nervously on his phone, his thumbs flying across the screen. Somewhere, this moment was already being shared with the world beyond the cabin. What the passengers didn't know was how deeply this incident would echo. This wasn't just about a haircut. It was about power, humiliation, and a line that had just been crossed in plain sight. The boy's silence was not surrender, it was the breath before the storm. Because one call, still waiting to be made, would change everything for everyone on that flight. Cliffhanger. But this was only the beginning, the moment before the storm. To the crew, she was simply Miss Daniels. To passengers, she looked like the model of authority, crisp uniform, hair pinned back, smile rehearsed to perfection. But beneath that polished exterior simmered something darker. This wasn't the first time she had singled someone out. Colleagues whispered about her strictness, a word often used to mask cruelty. More than once, passengers of color had left her flights in tears, brushed off as difficult or non-compliant in her reports. She thrived on control, on bending people under the weight of policy. Her favorite line was one she repeated often. Rules are rules. If you don't like it, fly another airline. Each time she said it, her ego swelled, mistaking obedience for respect. In truth, her authority was fragile, built not on dignity but on fear, and fear always cracks when light pierces through. What she failed to see in that moment was that this boy wasn't just another passenger she could humiliate and forget. His silence was not weakness. His family was not powerless. And the arrogance she wore like armor was about to become the very reason for her downfall. Cliffhanger. What the oppressor didn't know was that their target was not powerless. The boy was only 16, but his presence carried more maturity than most grown men. His dreadlocks weren't just hair, they were heritage, carefully nurtured by his mother's hands, a symbol of pride passed down through generations. Every strand told a story of identity, resilience, and belonging. To him, they weren't a style. They were a crown. Life had never been easy. He'd endured classrooms where teachers mispronounced his name, hallways where kids mocked his hair, and streets where strangers eyed him with suspicion. Yet through it all, he carried himself with quiet dignity. He excelled in school, played basketball with discipline, and cared for his younger siblings when his parents worked late. Respect wasn't something he demanded. It was something he lived. His father often told him, "Never let anyone take away who you are. Your roots run deeper than their ignorance." Those words shaped him, teaching him patience in the face of cruelty. So when the scissors cut into his dreadlocks, it wasn't just strands of hair falling. It was a legacy under attack. But what the flight attendant mistook as fragility was in truth a fire, one that was about to burn brighter than she could imagine. Cliffhanger, and in this moment, the very strength he had built would become the oppressor's undoing. The flight attendant's smirk only widened after the cruel act, as if cutting his dreadlocks was nothing more than enforcing order. Passengers gasped, some whispering in disbelief, others averting their eyes to avoid the tension pressing heavy in the cabin. The boy sat frozen, fists clenched tight, eyes burning with both shame and defiance. His crown had been torn from him, yet he refused to give the satisfaction of tears. His mother's voice shook as she demanded an explanation. "How dare you touch my son? Who gave you the right?" The attendant's tone dripped with arrogance. "His hair was a distraction. We have standards here. You people should be grateful we even let you board." The words sliced deeper than the scissors had, echoing across the silent rows. A child whimpered nearby. A businessman shifted uncomfortably in his seat. A young woman muttered, "This isn't right." But her voice was swallowed by the hush of fear. The boy sat taller, his silence louder than any protest. His dignity shone even as humiliation weighed on him. His mother's hand trembled as she reached for her phone. Cliffhanger. But just when it seemed the victim had no power left, a single phone call changed everything. The mother's trembling hand steadied as her thumb pressed the call button. The cabin's oppressive silence seemed to amplify the faint ringing from her phone. Every passenger leaned in without meaning to, drawn by the electricity of a moment about to break wide open. Then came the voice, calm, steady, authoritative. The boy's father. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her words spilled out like fire. "They cut his hair. On the plane. In front of everyone." The silence shattered. Gasps. Murmurs. Someone whispered, "They what?" The father's voice dropped into a tone that made the hairs on every listener's neck stand up. "Put the attendant on the phone. Now." The smug smile on the flight attendant faltered, just slightly, but enough for the cabin to notice. Her hand twitched nervously as she took the phone, eyes darting toward her supervisor, who suddenly looked pale. Passengers leaned closer, straining to hear. The father spoke with chilling clarity. "You touched my son. You humiliated him. Do you know whose job you're standing on right now?" The attendant swallowed hard. She tried to scoff, to laugh it off. But the authority in his voice cut deeper than any scissors ever could. The supervisor stepped in, whispering urgently, "Who is this?" The mother answered loud enough for the entire cabin to hear. "His father is on the airline's board. He doesn't just fly planes, he hires and fires the people who run them." The air pressure in the cabin seemed to change. Passengers sat upright, wide-eyed, watching power flip in real time. The father continued, each word precise. "You grounded my son's dignity. Now I'm grounding this plane. Get the captain." The supervisor scrambled down the aisle. Within minutes, the intercom crackled. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing an unexpected delay. Please remain seated." But everyone knew this wasn't just about a delay. This was Judgment Day. The attendant's arrogance melted into panic, her posture collapsing as whispers spread through the cabin like wildfire. Phones came out, cameras recording. Hashtags were already forming in people's minds. The boy sat straighter, reclaiming his dignity with every passing second. The humiliation had been real, but now so was the reversal. Cliffhanger. By the time the truth came out, the oppressor's fate was sealed. The plane never lifted off. Instead, it became the stage for a reckoning that would soon explode across the internet. Within hours, the first shaky passenger video was online, the boy sitting tall, the attendant shrinking under the weight of her choices. Hashtags lit up instantly. Hashtag justice for him. Hashtag cut down by bias. Hashtag grounded by truth. What started as whispers on a plane turned into trending topics worldwide. Twitter threads dissected every second of the footage. TikToks layered the audio of passengers gasping over slow-motion replays. On Instagram, captions burned. Imagine boarding a flight and leaving with your child's dignity stolen. News outlets pounced, framing headlines with outrage and disbelief. Activists weighed in. Influencers urged boycotts. Parents across the globe posted messages. That could have been my child. Inside the airline's headquarters, executives scrambled, their inboxes drowning with petitions and shareholder warnings. What was once a minor incident report had become a full-scale crisis. On the ground, the family walked off the plane with heads high. Cameras clicked. The boy's dreadlocks, uneven but unbroken, became a symbol of resilience. Cliffhanger. But what mattered most wasn't the punishment. It was the lesson that echoed far beyond the flight. When the noise quieted and the headlines began to fade, the boy's father sat with his son at the kitchen table. The uneven strands of his dreadlocks were still there, but so was something deeper, a calm strength. The father didn't talk about lawsuits or punishments first. He talked about dignity. About how no uniform, no title, no false authority could ever take away who his son was. He explained that this moment, painful as it was proof of something larger, that the fight for respect is not just about one child or one flight, but about generations who have endured and overcome. The boy nodded, his eyes bright. They tried to take something from me, he said softly, but they only made me stronger. And that was the lesson. Not that airlines crumble under pressure. Not that corporations panic at public shame. But that dignity, when defended, when lifted up, cannot be erased. The story spread because it was more than scandal. It became a reminder that humanity must always outweigh prejudice. Cliffhanger. Because this wasn't just one child's fight. It was everyone's. An airline thought it could humiliate a black teen and walk away unscathed. They thought cutting his dreadlocks would silence him, that dismissing his dignity would fade into the background noise of another day. But they were wrong. Because behind that boy stood a father with influence, a community with fire, and a world unwilling to let racism hide behind a corporate logo. This story wasn't just about one child or one airline. It was proof that when injustice plays out in the open, people will rally, voices will rise, and truth will break through. And now it's your turn. If this story moved you, share it. If you felt the anger in that moment of cruelty, let others feel it too. And if you felt the pride when justice struck back, pass it on. Every share, every comment, every voice is part of making sure no one can ever look away when dignity is denied. Because this fight doesn't stop here. It lives in classrooms, in workplaces, in neighborhoods, and yes, in airplanes. And it only takes one moment, one voice, to turn humiliation into power. Subscribe, share, and stand up. Together, we make sure this story is not forgotten.